last video, we learned how to use functions to work with date and time values. Prior to that, we also learned how to work with numeric data and string data. Now, in addition to using functions for working with specific types of data, we are going to learn how to use functions that can return a value determined by a condition you specify. The case, if, and choose functions. Let's take a look. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the SQL Server Series. This video is brought to you in reference to Joe Marach's SQL Server 2016 for developers. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of this book, then please follow the link in the description below. When you use the case function, SQL Server compares the input expression you code in the case clause with the expression you code in the when clause. So a simple case function is typically used with columns that can contain a limited number of values. That way all conditions that are specified based on the expression can be met. Now when you use the if function, it returns one of two values depending on the result of a conditional expression. Now when you use the choose function, it returns a value from a list of values depending on the index you specify. So the syntax for the case statement starts off by specifying the word case, and then it's going to be your input expression. And then after your input expression comes your when, and then is your when expression. And then after when comes then your result expression. And then in each case you can have multiple when and then, so you could even say when again, and then have a when expression too, and then another result expression. And then after that you can also have the else statement. You can say else if neither one of these result in true, then else, and then you'll have your else result expression. So if you're familiar with if, else, and switch statements from other programming languages like C and C# and C++, then you should be able to catch on to this one very quickly. And then you end your case with the end clause. So this is the syntax for the case statement, and we're going to take a look at how to use one. So I'm just going to use a simple case function here. I'm going to start by selecting all from invoices, and then I want to grab a few columns out first. I want to get my invoice number. Then I want to get my terms ID. And then I want to use the case function, so I'm going to say, hey, case when terms ID. And I'm going to say when the terms ID is equal to 1, then I want to display some message on the screen in my result set, and I want it to say print out net due 10 days. Right. The next one I want to say is when it is equal to 2, then say net due in 20 days. Now I want to say when it is equal to 3, then net due 30 days. I think you guys can kind of see the pattern here so far. When equal to 4, then net due 60 days. And when equal to 5, then net due 90 days. And then I'm going to end my case statement and as terms. I'm not going to add an else for this one. And then I'm going to run this query. You can see now we have our invoice number and we have our terms ID column, and then we have a case column here called terms ID, case terms ID, and we named it as terms. So we did end as terms, so it's called terms, and then it's saying when the terms ID is equal to 1, then display net due in 10 days. When it is equal to 2, displayed net due in 20 days. When it's equal to 3, displayed net due in 30 days. When it's equal to 4, displayed net due in 60 days. And when it is equal to 5, displayed net due in 90 days. So if we look at our result set, our first invoice number here has a terms ID of 3, so it is displaying in our terms column net due in 30 days based on this condition that it meets. And if we look here, our terms ID is equal to 1 in our row 8, so it is displaying net due in 10 days based on this condition. If we keep looking down, we run into our terms ID 2 under row 12 and 13, where it is displaying net due in 20 days. So this is a simple case statement that you can use. And if you wanted to add an else statement, if you wanted to say else, if it doesn't equal neither one of these, then you can just print something else out of the screen, does not equal. And looks like that would have to go before your end, so it would be right in here, right? Based on the syntax that we have up here above. And then we could run this, and if it's else, then it'll display does not equal. But looks like all of them meet in this case, so we're not going to see an else. Let's take a look at a little bit more complex one that uses a search case function. So I'm going to select all from invoices again. And then I want to bring out some columns, right? I want my invoice number, I want my invoice total, I want my invoice date, and then I want my invoice due date. And then I'm going to say case when, and then I'm going to use the date difference function. We just learned about this a few videos ago, or the last video. Then I'm going to say date difference day, and I'm going to pass in my invoice due date. And I'm going to say get date, and I'm going to say greater than 30. So when the difference between the invoice date and our current date is greater than 30, because we are specifying the day as our date difference, it's going to result in true. So then we can say then over 30 days past due, right? Our next one can say when the date difference, the difference between, based on day as our interval, invoice due date, and then our current date, get date, is greater than 0. So when the difference between our invoice due date and our current date is greater than 0, then we're going to display a message out on the screen, 1 to 30 days past due. Else, we're just going to say it's current, which means, you know, we have nothing past due based on our date difference from the invoice due date and the current date for 30 days and for greater than 30 days and greater than 0. Then we can just end this as status, and we can run this query. You see we have our invoice number, our invoice total, our invoice due date and invoice date columns. Then we have our status column here, which is the case function that we created, and it takes the difference between the invoice due date and our current date. If it's greater than 30, then it displays over 30 days past due. And if it's greater than 0, then it displays 1 to 30 days past due. But in this case, it's greater than 30 days past due for each one of these, so that is what we that is what we see here in our result set. Now let's take a look at the if function. Now remember, the if function returns one of two values based on whether or not the result of the conditional expression is true. So our syntax for the if function is if, and then it's going to be our conditional expression, and then it's going to be our true value, and then our false value. So if the conditional expression results in true, then you display our true value. If this conditional expression results in false, then you display our false value here. So I'm going to comment this out. This is our syntax, and then we're going to step into an example. First one I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all from invoices, and then I'm going to grab some columns here. I'm going to get my vendor ID, and then I want to get the sum of my invoice total. I'm going to name that as sum invoices. And then after that, I want to use the if function, and then if sum of the invoice total is less than 1,000, then my true value is going to display low. If it happens to be greater than 1,000, then my false value is going to display high. And then I'm just going to name this as invoice range. And then I'm going to group by vendor ID. And I'm going to run this query. And it looks like it is saying the if function is not a recognized built-in function name. So I spelled it wrong. It's supposed to be IIF, and same goes for up here. Now I'm going to run it, and we now have our vendor ID, our sum of invoices, and our invoice range that we just created using the if function. So what this did was it said if the sum of the invoice total is less than 1,000 for the given vendor ID and sum of invoices, then display low. If it is not, if that results in false, then you're going to display high, and then name that as our invoice range. So if you look at our result set here for vendor 34, our sum of invoices is 1,200. So that does not result in true because that is greater than 1,000. So our invoice range displays high. If you look at the next one, vendor ID 37 has a sum of invoices 564. That one results in true. It is less than 1,000. So our invoice range displays the word low. So that's how the if function works. Now the last one we're going to look at is the choose function. The choose function returns a value from a list of values depending on the index you specify. So the syntax for the choose function is going to be choose, and then the index that you have to specify, and then the values that are going to be displayed. And then there's also an optional value 3 that can be displayed in this one as well. So we're going to comment that out. That's our syntax, and then I'm going to write a select statement here that kind of uses the choose function. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all from invoices, and then I'm going to want to get my invoice number, my invoice date, and then I want my invoice total, and then I'm going to use the choose function, choose, and then the index that I'm going to specify is going to be my terms ID. This is a primary key. It's very important that you recognize that passing in an index is usually going to be passing in a primary key or of some sort, or a foreign key. So my first value is going to be 10 days. My next value is going to be 20 days. And then, like we said, you can have an optional value 3, and you can even go further than that. So I'm going to say 30 days, and then I'm going to say 60 days. You can just keep creating your chooses here, and then I'm going to stop at 90 days. And then I'm going to name this as net due. That's going to come from the invoices table, and then I'm going to add in a where clause after I close my choose function. And then my where clause is going to say where the invoice total minus the payment total minus the credit total is greater than 0. And then we're going to run this query, and you see we have our invoice number, our invoice date, our invoice total columns that we've pulled out, and then our choose function created another result set column called net due based on the terms ID. Now really quick, one more thing I'm going to add in here is our terms ID, and that's the same index that we're using for a choose, because I want to show you exactly what the choose function has done here. Now because it provides an index into a list of values, the index value must be a type that can be converted into an integer value, and it must range from 1 to the number of values in the list. So by running our query again here, by pulling out the terms ID, we see here that our net due days that we have for 30 days is sitting under terms ID 3, which is 1, 2, 3, the third terms ID in the index. If you look at row number 3, terms ID 2 shows 20 days, and that is the second terms ID in the index. And if there was a 1, then it would show 10 days. If there was a 4, then it would show 60 days, and if there was a 5, it would show 90 days. So that's how the choose function works. So that is all for this video. In our next video, we're going to start learning how to do database design and implementation. So if you're interested in our next video, head on over to database-tutorials.com. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you did not enjoy it, hit the unlike button. And if you want to receive a notification when our next video gets posted, hit the subscribe button. So thank you for watching, and see you next time.